Awesome. Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. My name is Sumit, and I'm talking about the stack of the future. And as you heard, these are all the buzzwords that you imagine, but I will show you the details as well. So it was already mentioned during the daytime. I'm head of engineering at ShareNow here in Hamburg and Berlin every now and then. And during the nighttime, I'm building two projects, Trezor1 and Geoman.io. I will be showing some of the examples on Trezor.1, and you will see what kind of application it is. But in general, I try to make them profitable. So not only a side project to learn new technologies, but also to create some revenue, ideally. Let's jump right into it. What's the stack that I'm talking about? So yeah, there are many technologies out there, but I'm talking specifically about static front ends. I'm talking serverless functions, and I'm talking software as a service helpers. These are a little bit more than helpers, but I will get to it. Yeah, all the buzzwords. And is it really the stack where you can build production ready applications on? And I'm convinced, yes, not only convinced, but I'm doing it. And I think a lot of people are doing it. And you will, if you try it out, if you haven't tried it out yet, I hope after this talk you will. And you will see how powerful that stack is. So let's start with static frontends first. This is something where I think a lot of you here in the audience are familiar with if we are talking Nuxt.js. So you all know Vue.js, of course, and Nuxt is basically an abstraction on Vue, a framework to make it easier to do server-side rendering and static frontends. You can also do single-page applications with it or progressive web apps with it, of course. But in general, it's opinionated. It gives you a lot of defaults. In the trade-off of being opinionated and a little bit more limited, or let's say gives you the framework how to use it. And this makes it really, really, really fast to get started and have basically an application with all bells and whistles ready. It's similar to Next.js that you might know from the React world. So if you want to go server-side rendering or static, in the Vue ecosystem, Nuxt is the choice to make. And I will show you a little bit how, some examples how that looks like in my current projects. But the main question, if you go for Nuxt, or that you have to answer for yourself, is: do I want a single page application, a server-side rendered application, or a static website? And I think static is the future. Because of multiple reasons. So a single page application is the thing that has been popular for the last 10, 20 years, where you basically launch a minimal HTML file and everything else is loaded through JavaScript. You load the data asynchronously from the client and populate the front end. This has a few downsides. It has a few upsides, of course, as well. That's why it got popular in the first place. Everything is like more an application, and it puts a lot of logic into the client, which is great for us front-end developers. But in general, the downside is you have bigger loading time. So in general, it feels more slow to the user. Specifically, you have a loading spinner that got popular through the SPA through the single page application. And you of course have a search engine optimization problem. So the content is not in the files yet when the crawler goes through, and it's not ideal. And you put, of course, a lot of logic into the client. Everything has to go through the APIs, etc. So this is a single page app. It's still great. It's still used widely, but I think everything will move to static. Let's look at server-side rendering. This is something where I think it has a lot of upsides regarding search engine optimization, regarding performance, especially for dynamic pages. So if people have to log in, if your users log in and they see different content than the rest. So let's say the landing page is the same for everyone, but if you log in and the user sees their own dashboard, for example, with their own data, then this is of course different content, and you can't just like serve the same content to everyone. So this is where server-side rendering is really nice, because it renders everything on the server and sends the finished HTML to the client. This has to be done upon request, of course. You can do caching in between, so it can be also very performant, but it gets a lot of complexity on the server side. So to host a server-side application, server-side rendering application is nice with Nuxt. So it's very well done, but on the hosting side, you have a bit more complexity. So you have to find a host where you can put this on, and you will always have some, let's say, overhead or work on the server side that needs to be done and maintained. The static page is, I feel like, where we went full circle, because when the web started and we did HTML pages, files in Notepad and maybe Dreamweaver, I don't know, but the old school stuff where you really wrote CSS in the HTML file and HTML, and etc., and JavaScript in a separate file and stuff like this, and then link them manually. This is where everything was static, and you put it on an FTP server where you had an Apache running or whatever, which you didn't even do. The hosts were doing this, and everything was just working. So it was very, very simple. You just throw the HTML file on the server and everything was working. Every now and then you had to configure something, but it was very easy. And that's why until a few years also, FTP uploads was still very, very popular. I'm not sure if it still is. I don't know anyone who's still uploading via FTP, but it was for a long time. It stuck in the community, and I think a big reason for that is that it was so simple and easy. And now with static frontends coming back, but much, much more powerful in the Vue ecosystem and the React ecosystem through Nuxt and Next, we come back to this and all the benefits that come with static. So let's get into the awesomeness of static. So first of all, it has amazing speed, right? If you load an application that is statically rendered, and you can try this out, if you load the application Trésor.1, for example, the front end is completely static. It's very fast. Like also, if you go to the blog, it's instant. There is no loading time, simply because everything is already rendered. Everything is in that one HTML file already. And it's not only fast on my computer because I have the server in the basement. I'm not even at home right now. So it's fast everywhere. And this is because it's static, and you can push the files to the CDN, to a content delivery network, everywhere in the world. That means wherever you are, you access that site, it will be fast. It will be very fast. It's of course search engine ready, search engine optimized. A crawler can see the whole content and everything, and all the bells and whistles are included. So I have HTTPS, of course, HTTP2, all that good stuff is in there, and it's just as simple as FTP, if not simpler. And I will show you a little bit how that works today. So I think go static in Nuxt. That's definitely the way to go. If you let me spontaneously open up my editor, if you go into the Nuxt config, so this is the Trésor1 project, and if you go into the Nuxt config, and where's the mode? I think it's called mode. No, somewhere you have to tell it basically that it generates your routes. It's called universal, I think. Not even finding it. Maybe it's a default mode. Yeah, that was a spontaneous fail. But anyways, if you look at the Nuxt page, you will find out how to do that. So you have basically the mode single page application, and I think it's called universal. And maybe that's the default mode. That's why I don't have it in there. But then you can use the Nuxt generate command, and it basically pre-renders all your files. So the build process with Webpack goes through your application, launches it in a headless browser during the build, and creates all the routes you have there. So if you have this, I can show you, of course. So, oh, I think I included a screenshot also somewhere. No, I will show you here. So you have a, so let me show you the file structure here. So I hope it's visible. Yes. This is a typical Nuxt project. And here you have the pages folder. If I open this up, you can see a few folders and a few view files. And this index file here is basically my landing page. Portfolio Auswertung, so this is German, of course. And this is this one here, right? This copy. So this is the index file, and if I now do Nuxt generate, it will create basically a index HTML with this content in it, with all of it. But it gets much more interesting and powerful when you go into dynamic stuff, like, for example, my blog. So I have a blog folder here, and then I have an index view, and that is basically the blog view. So this is this one here. It shows all of the blog posts. And these blog posts come from a service called Ghost, ghost.org. It's a blogging platform, this one. And I basically write my blog posts in Ghost and fetch them through an API to display here. And this normally is, this is a perfect example for a single page application, right? You open the page, you open the blog, it fetches the blog posts from Ghost and then displays them. But if you want it statically rendered, then you fetch the blog posts during the build time and create all of the routes, all of the blog posts that you have already during the build. And that means you have it statically rendered. So these blog posts are just as fast as the rest of the site. Nothing is loaded from Ghost here during rendering, or some updates could be loaded, of course, because during the client-side navigation, it acts like a single page app. But the Google crawler, for example, search engines, they can just crawl everything fine because every route, even the dynamic ones, are statically rendered. So as you can see here, I have _post, and this is basically a wildcard, a variable, a dynamic route in Nuxt. So what you saw briefly maybe here is that in the generate command, I have the routes property here, and there you can see it. During the generate, it fetches my posts from Ghost, and then it basically creates the URLs, the blog URL, and the slug that I get from Ghost. So the slug is basically this part here, right? The individual URL part for a blog post. And then it creates these routes during the build and tries to access them in that headless browser. And when it tries to access them, it will load the post from Ghost. It will render it. And then it will put everything into the HTML file and serve it up. So if I look at the dist folder here, you can see in blog, here are all the blog posts that I have. And if I go in, you can see there's just an index HTML with all of the content in it. So it's actually rendered as if I would have written it myself in HTML. And this is where all the goodness comes from regarding speed and accessibility and everything. This is really, really powerful and amazing. Of course, it gets a little bit more complicated if we are talking user-generated content. So let's say you have a site with 10,000 users and each of them create their own content, like in a blog or a forum, sorry, not in a blog, like in a forum, and you want this search engine optimized, then you need to pre-render basically every time a user creates something. And this is also possible, and it's not even that complicated. So for me, Trezor One is a portfolio tracking application. So this is a portfolio, as you can see, with some ETFs and stocks, etc. So if I would like to pre-render this, that's also just as possible with the blog posts, right? I have to just put into the generate command that I load this data and put it in there. The problem for me personally, this is not a problem of Nuxt or whatever I'm using here, is that stock data, it changes like every minute, right? Every second. So as this needs to constantly be up to date, I'm a bit hesitant of pre-rendering this, but I will still go there at one point because I can at least pre-render from like the previous day for this. But for content that changes less often, like a forum or something like this, you can pre-render the individual like as they are updated. And I will tell you in a second how this is done, because if you are following closely, you might ask yourself now, okay, if I pre-render my blog posts through this generate command, and it comes during the build process, when will actually be when a new blog post is published, or when you write a new blog post, do you have to deploy again? And this is where some people might think this is a downside, but yes, you have to deploy again. But I will show you that this is an absolute non-issue. So you basically have to trigger the build again. So it fetches it again, and then so the blog post, it fetches the new blog post and statically renders it again. This is, normally this would be a downside. I also agree that like a year ago, this was a downside for me, and I would have written the blog in a single page application style. But today, or I think it has been like in the last half year, there have been such advancements in this area that I can tell you it's a non-issue anymore. I will show you today how, and it's absolutely fantastic. So it all boils down, if you have built a static application, to the hosting and deployment. How do you host it? How do you deploy it? How do you build it? And this is the next topic that I want to talk about. The services that I'm using here are GitHub and Vercel. Vercel was previously known as Site. If you have been following me a little bit, or the talks I've previously given here at Vue.js Berlin, then you might know that I'm a big fanboy of Site or Vercel now, because their tooling for front-end developers in general is so absolutely powerful that makes the whole thing possible, the stack of the future. And in general, deployment is not like you have to do with a bunch of build servers or whatever. You basically have your Git repository, and let's say you have your master branch or production branch, and you have your develop branch, for example. Then you go into your dashboard on site. This is my live dashboard from Trezor, or my real project. You create a project, you connect it to your Git repository, and basically, if you push to the default branch, it's automatically deployed. Like, it will take the files in there, it will start the build process, and there is no configuration required at all. It knows Next, it knows Next, it knows React, Vue, like all of the frameworks are supported. That means you just push to master, production, whatever, and it's being built. It's being built, served, put into a URL, HTTPS, and everything. It creates a unique URL, and if you then assign a domain to your project, it will automatically assign that domain as well. And you can do this for different branches. So I have a production branch, I have a develop branch, maybe I have a staging branch, and I give different URLs to those. Like, as you can see here, I have domains mapped to this project, like tresor.one and dev.tresor.one. And I have them individually connected or assigned to a different branch. And that means if I push to my develop branch, I get it under dev.tresor.one, right? Like a staging environment. And if I push to the master branch or merge the develop branch into master, it's a production deployment immediately. So this is like, you don't have to do anything. It's zero config, nothing has to be done. You connect it here, it takes you like 2 minutes to set up, and everything is deployed with all bells and whistles, including you have the static frontend if you use Next Generate. It's pushed to an edge network of CDNs. It's available everywhere. Lighthouse score of 100 everywhere. It's absolutely fantastic. So setup is really, really simple, and like really, really fast. So it makes me speechless when thinking about it again, because you can focus so much only on your application. Like the infrastructure stuff is just gone. No infrastructure work required anymore for this. And you still have such a powerful setup. So for me, this is absolutely fantastic. And yeah, we are at a Vue.js Berlin meetup here. So I think we have a lot of front-end developers listening and watching. So I think this is very interesting for you as well. Can you, not sure if I just had a hiccup. Are you still seeing me? Yes, I think so. And hearing as well, I hope. Because I just had to change a cable here. So, okay. Okay, great. Thank you. Then let's move on, because we have the juicy part still coming. This was the front-end part, but of course, every sophisticated application needs a backend. And this backend here would be serverless functions. And this might be a bit of a buzzword for a lot of people, that it's like you can't really use it on production or something like this. But actually, it's really, really powerful. And it's not even, so I showed you how simple static frontends are. If we look at serverless functions, the cool thing is it's just as simple. So you don't need like AWS, Lambda, ERM, whatever, no Docker, Kubernetes build servers, not even blockchain. You don't need any of this. Again, the same hosts that I use for my static frontends is used for the serverless applications, and it abstracts away everything of the pain. So let's get into it. One serverless function is this. So this is all there is in a JavaScript file. You create a JavaScript file, you export your function, and you send the response. Hi Vue.js meetup. If I deploy that or push it to my branch and it gets automatically deployed, I have this available as an API endpoint, as a serverless function immediately, and it returns that. So looks a bit simple, right? What could actually be the use case for this? When could we use this? So let's look at my my website again. So this is Trezor, and my laptop is a little bit lagging. So let's see. This is the feedback form here, and I write myself now feedback, and this has been sent now via email to me. If a user sends feedback, I get an email through a serverless function. And let me show you that function. I'm having a bit of a lag here. Hope you can still see me fluently, but I will close down some applications. Anyways, this is the function that I just executed basically. So in the begin, so on the top, you see I import two dependencies, SendGrid and Validator. I just install them in the same project, in my Next project. I install the dependencies, I import them into a JavaScript file, and this is the function how I send the email, right? This is just calling the SendGrid function, putting the email, the message, etc. in. And if it's an error, I return the error. And then here, I actually export the serverless function, that what ultimately becomes the API endpoint. I check if it's a post request. If not, return a 404. I check if the email is correct. If not, return that it's an invalid email. And otherwise, I just send the email. And if it's successful, I send it 200 OK. And this is everything that happened when I just sent that feedback. And the really cool part comes when you see how this is integrated into the same stack that I just showed you regarding the front end part. So as you can see here, oops, Let me go up here again. So as you can see here, I have an API folder, and this is basically an opinionated, let's say, starting point or an entry point for Vercel. So if you create an API folder in your front-end project and deploy that, they will go through that and create for each JavaScript file an API endpoint. And as you can see here, I have portfolios, which will create basically it's the same logic as with the pages in Nuxt, /API, /portfolios, /activities, /an activity ID. You know, this will be the API endpoint. And the JavaScript file behind that has everything in there included. So if I open this up, it will be a little bit more verbose, but I get my utility function here. And then again, I just export the API endpoint. I check for authorization. Is the user, allowed to do what he or she is trying to do? And then I do the stuff, updating activities, deleting activities, etc. So it's very, very, very simple. Yeah, I am speechless how simple it is. And it's basically your entire backend. No need to, create a server or anything. You just focus on your business logic. There is no configuration required. There is no setup required. You just build the function, the business logic that you need, deploy it with your front-end project, and it's up and running and available. So the URL would be something like this. I can't just call a function now in that project because it's protected, of course. But it's basically like this: tresor.one /API/ and then you have all your API endpoints. And this just comes with every deployment. So backend and static front-end website, or serverless function and static front-end together give you all the tools you need to create very, very powerful applications. This is again the folder structure that I just showed you. Utils here is also just a naming convention. It will not create API functions out of those serverless functions, because those are in those utility functions I write to the database and stuff like this. And just these file structure here are basically the endpoints, the RESTful endpoints that I'm creating. So you still need a couple of stuff, of course, right? Every sophisticated application needs a bit more than a few nice functions. There are some bigger things to talk about, and this is where SaaS helpers come in. So software as a service products that basically the problems that you probably have for your product are already solved, and you're using tools from pros, from companies that just deal with this one problem and use their service to solve it for you. So you don't have to write it and worry about it at all. So I'm going to show you a few SaaS companies or products that I'm using for the different, let's say, problems that I needed solved. And I'm also going to tell you some of the alternatives. Yeah, it's just to give you a rough idea what services are out there to complement your static front end and your serverless functions, so you don't need any additional backend or something. So one is, of course, the database. I use currently MongoDB Atlas, the hosted version. It has a generous free plan. It's pretty awesome. And I tried some others also. So there is FaunaDB, there is Firebase, Firestore, and the real-time database. And of course, you have a whole array of other services out there from AWS and others. So if you are familiar with MongoDB already, it's quite simple to get started. And it's just like in any node application, how you would do that in a cloud function, right? You write a utility function that connects to it, to the database, and then you just write to it. So very, very simple. Next up, authentication. This is a bigger topic, especially regarding serverless functions, because it seems like, you have a bit of an overhead here to do, because serverless functions are like mini backends, and each of the functions go to sleep, and when you put a request, it wakes up again, and then it stays up, I don't know, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, and it will continue to stay up when there are requests coming in. So the bigger the application, the faster it gets, because the serverless functions will not go to sleep. When they go to sleep, the initial request will take a little bit longer. And if you put authentication in, then at least I haven't properly figured out how to cache a user session yet, because you can't just store something to memory, as the serverless functions don't share memory. So if a user logs in, does a request to the API, the access token is valid, you do something, for the next request, you have to validate it again. And this is a bit of an overhead. And I wrote basically my own wrapper there to cache the token. This is something where I think solutions still have to be provided and will come either from companies like Auth0 or from hosting providers like Vercel. But you can basically use MongoDB or a faster like Redis or something, caching library, caching database to cache the tokens yourself. So it's not a lot of logic, right? It's like 30 lines of code or something. But this is a bit of a, let's say, workaround where I felt like I have to create the solution on my own. But in general, authentication, login, etc., all done by Auth0. So if I let's see if it goes a little bit faster. Again, I apologize. I can't really show you the demo right now as my laptop is crawling to a halt because I have only 2% left. So authentication is a topic that you absolutely need for any sophisticated application. And you have Okta there, Auth0, Firebase offers it also a very cool solution. And doesn't matter if you embed it in your website or you use it via redirect, both will work fine. And I'm using Auth0 on Trezor.one, and it works just fine. Just the API authentication or the access token. I wish I had a better way to cache it. And also the Nuxt module for authentication is also like lacking some features regarding token expiry and token refresh tokens and stuff. But they are working on a new version 5, very actively. So can't wait until that comes out, because it will solve some, let's say, login session issues in my projects. But I can definitely recommend the whole combo. It's pretty nice. I haven't tried Okta, but I hear also very nice things of Okta. I have used Firebase in the past, which is also quite good. Then we have payment, of course. So payment, you have many players available. Aiden is one, PayPal, Gumroad, and Stripe. And Stripe is the one I'm choosing for most of my projects. Stripe is just like the golden standard. The APIs, the dashboard, the functionality, everything, it's so professional and really nice. I can definitely recommend it, but also it's a bit expensive regarding the fees. But I don't think PayPal and stuff are a lot cheaper. So I don't think you can go wrong with any of them, except Gumroad is maybe not suited for specific products. It's more suited if you like sell ebooks or something like this. Like if you're a creator, an artist, and you sell stuff to an audience and not a website, a product that you have. It's more tailored towards you personally. But that's just a side thing. There are enough payment options available where you just redirect the user. Even with Stripe, if you don't use client-side code for that, you can basically do everything server-side, everything in the serverless functions. When a user clicks on buy for my paid plan on Trezor, I create a session inside a cloud function and then redirect the user to that session. And then everything is handled on Stripe. So I don't handle credit card input or anything like this. Fantastic, just how it should be. And they also offer self-service, so the users can even change their credit card later, cancel their subscription without me doing much. So my Stripe code to accept payments is like 20 lines of code. Really awesome. And the fourth service that I use currently is SendGrid, because I need to send some emails during registration, during some product updates every now and then. and in the future, like password forgotten stuff and stuff like this. This is what I use SendGrid for. There are, of course, others out there like ConvertKit, MailChimp, all these services for email sending. And also then, if I want to send an email, I have one cloud function to send an email, and it's like 30 lines of code. So pretty nice. I'm happy to share more examples here. I would show you some of the code, but again, I apologize that my laptop is currently somehow not managing to load fast enough. So I'm almost through. Let's wrap up a bit of the benefits of that stack. You only write the code you need. As you saw, like the stuff I showed you is an entire project. This is all I've written for Tresor.one. I only write the code I need. I have no overhead. I have basically zero config. I can get started with zero config. I can add some config if I need some specific things here and there. But in general, the setup is zero config. You focus 100% on your business logic. You have a lot of speed gains in development. So basically coding, finishing your product is much faster, but also your execution time from the application itself is much faster. And this is really something that I think is underestimated a lot. And of course, you use existing solutions for problems that have been solved already. So doesn't matter if it's payment or authentication, like you don't have to solve this thing again and again. It's solved already, just use an existing solution. So the main takeaway for me with this setup is you solve the user's problems, not tech problems. You don't write infrastructure code, you don't set up servers or maintain them or something like this. You just write cool, awesome applications for your users, focus on them, deploy them, and continue to work on them. This is all I do, really. There is almost no maintenance work for me on this stuff. So I'm blown away how far the front end, let's say, tooling went in the last years. And I don't think there is much more to be needed for most applications. It's fantastic, and I can definitely recommend it. So thank you for listening. Thanks for being here. You can follow me on Twitter and YouTube, of course. I'm sharing the whole journey of building Tresor and Geoman to profitable side projects. And of course, I'm using that stack. So if you're interested in that, I'm looking forward to have you on board. And thanks again for listening. I will be jumping into the comments for any questions that arise.